Going to be replacing the sway bar end link on a 2009 Honda Pilot, which are notorious for having these go out. That's the bad boot on the bottom part of the link. One of the difficult parts about getting these off is that twisting the nut can just twist the ball inside the socket. So you need to get some vice grips and clamp those onto this inner bolt collar on the right side of the picture here. Make sure you get a good grip on it so it doesn't just spin. When you get the vice grip on the collar of the bolt, it's nice to have it up against something on the other side so you don't have to try to hold it. I've clamped it on as close to the bottom side of that spring as I can, so when I twist it, it will have immediate resistance. I'm using about a 2-foot extension bar to get that nut off of the bolt. Give me a little bit extra leverage if your impact driver or power wrench isn't getting it. I treated this before with a little bit of WD-40 and let it soak. I've broken the seal on it, so it's loose. I ought to be able to pop it off with my driver now. I just showed you the way to get the nut off of the top connection on that link. There's a little trick you can use on the bottom one or the top. It's easier to do on the bottom though because of these little plastic buttons on the back side. Those are connected to the inner socket that the ball sits in, and if you grind those off, you can pop the entire thing off and it'll give you a little bit more space to work with to remove the nut on the bottom side. I found it a little bit difficult to get to the back of that head, so in order to free up some space to work, after removing the nut on the top bolt, I took some tension off of this and popped it out so I have some leeway on the bottom head and can twist it into a little bit more accessible position for sanding or grinding. I'm just going to use an orbital sander with some high grit on it. I'm just going to grind those buttons off. Once you've sanded those buttons or grinded them down, you'll see them flat with the head. That will allow you to pop this off so you can have something better to grip when you're trying to get that back nut off. Okay, now that those are sanded off, we can try to pop this socket off the ball with the hammer. Now that I've popped that head off, you can see I've got a little bit better access and exposure to this area here so I can get vice grips on it. You can also pop this socket off and grab directly onto the ball if you'd like. Once again, I like to put the vice grips on here somewhere that they're going to have something solid that they can spin into and grab quickly. Fortunately, there's this arm here that I can clamp onto the ball joint there and have the vice grips up against this arm to prevent it spinning. It's important to remember when hooking up your vice grips and putting the socket on the back side that it's on the opposite side of you that you're trying to loosen. So in order to loosen the bolt, you need to spin it in a clockwise direction from the opposite side, which is the counterclockwise if you were facing the nut. So in this case, we'll be spinning it clockwise. The sway bar has too much play in it when I try to loosen it. I'm not getting any resistance because of the flex in the arm. So I've taken a couple of blocks and stacked them underneath there to hopefully eliminate that give and loosen the nut. Okay, those little blocks did the trick. I broke the nut from the bolt. It also soaked it before with some WD-40. Now that it's been broke, I can hook up this knuckle to my driver, get it off a little bit more quickly, or use a ratchet to twist it all the way off. Got everything off of there. There's the blocks I used, so when I tried to loosen the nut, it would prevent the arm from swinging any further than it did. I've got it all off now. Just time to put the new one back in. There's a little bit of a tricky part because the space between the two mounting holes has gotten smaller without the link in there, and so you need to use some spreaders or something to hold those apart so you can get the new link in place. I'll do that next. Here's the new link. I've got it placed in the bottom mounting hole, but as you can see, I'm not quite lined up there on the top mounting hole, so we need to get that distance closed down. There is a little bit of play in those bolts, but not enough to close that gap. I found it easier to put the bottom connection in, grab that bolt and nut and tighten it down a little ways so it doesn't come out. Tighten it more later. But I found it easier since this top mounting hole is more static. The plays in the bottom arm just seemed a little bit easier to get this lined up if I moved the bottom one and had it already attached. Get one side of your spreader down on that lower arm and find somewhere good to get the other side, and you'll notice that as you start to spread these, that gap will begin to close so we can line up that bolt into the other mounting hole. As you can see, I've got that lined up now. Able to push that through. Start putting the nut on this one. You'll notice that on that bolt there's an Allen wrench fitting. That's because in theory when you tighten that nut it could just spin the ball inside the socket. So as I tighten it, I make sure that I'm not spinning on the back side here. I found that when I tighten that with leverage that it doesn't spin the ball on the socket, and the only way to operate the Allen wrench and another wrench to tighten the nut is to use a box wrench and have very little leverage. So I figure I've gotten it tighter with the extended arm and not spinning anything than I could with an Allen wrench and a box wrench. Once you get those tightened on, you're all done, except for putting the tire back on. Not a bad time to inspect the brakes while you're in here. Mine look okay. Get the tire back on, you'll be out driving without sounding like you're on train tracks anymore. Thanks for watching.